Welcome back to Sera's Werewolf romance collection, where the alphas are hot-headed and the women carry steel pipes. Quick question for the pack before we jump into today's chaos. Where are you hiding out while you listen to us today? Let me know in the comments and drop a cat emoji if you have a pet at home who is just as grumpy as Buttercup the Lykoi cat. Today we have a wild one. It involves a ruined balcony, a very large repair bill, and an alpha who is still hot, even when he's standing in a freezing rainstorm. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to spicy stories like this one, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the food truck running and the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. The grill is hot and the alpha is in trouble. Let's read. Chapter 1. Grease popped and hissed across the flat-top grill, filling the cramped interior of the Midnight Sizzle with the rich aroma of searing beef and caramelized onions. Jasmine flipped 3 gourmet sliders with a swift, practiced twist of her wrist. She wore her hair pulled up in a messy bun, secured by a bright yellow scrunchie that stood out against the late-night gloom of the Copperfalls neutral district. Outside the service window, the line of late-night patrons buzzed with weekend energy. Jasmine wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, her soft curves shifting beneath her practical canvas apron. She thrived in this organized chaos. Owning this food truck represented her survival. Down near the cash register, Buttercup sat perched on a milk crate. The Lykoi cat looked like a disgruntled gremlin. With his sparse, wire-like gray fur, large ears, and unblinking golden eyes, he resembled a tiny werewolf caught mid-transformation. A shiny metal bottle cap rested between his paws, his latest hoarded treasure. A man in a torn denim jacket stumbled up to the window. He bypassed the line, bringing a sour stench of stale beer with him. "Gimme the food," the man slurred, slamming a closed fist against the stainless steel counter. "There's a line, sir," Jasmine stated. She kept her voice even and polite, turning back to the grill. "You need to wait your turn." "I said now!" The drunk customer leaned his torso through the open service window, his eyes darting around the small space. His gaze locked onto the glass tip jar sitting near the ledge, stuffed with crinkled dollar bills. He lunged, his thick fingers stretching to grab the cash. Buttercup moved with lightning speed. The Lykoi cat launched himself from the milk crate, hissing a sharp, guttural warning. Claws flashed. The cat swatted the man's knuckles, drawing a thin line of blood. The man yelped, jerking his hand back. "You stupid mutant rat!" he shouted, raising his fist to swing at the cat. Jasmine did not hesitate. She dropped her spatula. She dropped into a crouch, reaching under the 3-compartment sink. Her fingers wrapped around the cold, textured grip of a heavy, solid, steel plumbing pipe she kept wedged beside the drain pipes. She stood back up, bringing the heavy metal weapon down hard onto the front counter with a deafening, metallic crack. The drunk man froze. "Back away from my cat, and step away from my truck," Jasmine commanded. Her bright, expressive eyes hardened into sharp points of defiance. She gripped the pipe with both hands, planting her boots firm on the floor mats. "I built this life from the ground up, and I refuse to let anyone steal a single dime from me ever again." The man stared at the heavy steel pipe, then down at the hissing Lykoi cat. He cursed under his breath, stumbling backward into the damp street before turning and disappearing down the alleyway. Jasmine let out a long breath. She lowered the pipe, offering Buttercup a quick scratch behind his large ears. The cat purred a rough, gravelly sound, returning to his bottle cap. A quiet chuckle drifted from the shadows near the alley entrance. Jasmine snapped her head up. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the ambient glow of the street lamp. He wore a dark Henley shirt that stretched tight across a muscular chest. His messy dark hair framed a sharply angled jaw. He stopped just short of the window, leaning one thick forearm against the ledge. He watched her with intense, hungry eyes, a warm, lively grin spreading across his face. Chapter 2. Theodore studied the human woman behind the counter. He took in her flushed cheeks, the bright yellow scrunchie, and the heavy steel pipe she still held in one hand. As the leader of the Iron Ridge Pack, he spent his days dealing with violent rogue wolves and pack politics. This brave, practical woman defending her turf with a plumbing pipe fascinated him. "That was quite the show," Theodore said, his voice a rich baritone. He offered her a charming, easy smile, hoping to put her at ease. Jasmine did not blush. She did not lower her gaze. She simply set the steel pipe back under the 3-compartment sink and picked up a clean rag. "What can I get for you?" Before Theodore could answer, 2 towering figures stepped out of the darkness, flanking him. David and Felix, his top enforcers, stood like stone statues, their sheer size blocking the glow of the street lamps. Their presence suffocated the relaxed atmosphere Theodore wanted to create. Theodore sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Back off. Go stand by the charcoal utility truck. Now." David and Felix exchanged a glance but stepped backward, retreating to the parked truck at the edge of the alley. Theodore turned his attention back to Jasmine, leaning closer to the window. "Sorry about them," Theodore said, resting his elbows on the counter. He flexed his shoulders, trying to project a subtle wave of his alpha command, a heavy push of dominance that naturally forced others to submit or falter. He wanted to see if she would drop her guard. "I'll take 3 of those sliders, and maybe your phone number." The wave of dominance hit Jasmine. She blinked, unfazed. She pulled a thick, red spiral notebook from beneath the register and flipped it open, clicking her pen. 3 gourmet sliders. That will be a strict $24, Jasmine stated. She tapped the pen against the paper, waiting. Theodore stared at her. His inner beast scratched at his mind, confused. No one ignored an alpha command. Yet this woman stood tall, demanding accountability for her cooked meat. She treated him like any other hungry customer on the street. "My command bends the knees of hardened fighters, yet this human looks at me like I am nothing more than an unpaid invoice." A genuine, rumbling laugh escaped Theodore's chest. The sound surprised him. He could not remember the last time he felt this light. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick, scuffed leather wallet. He extracted 3 crisp $10 bills and placed them on the counter. "Keep the change," he offered, flashing his warm grin again. "I don't take charity," Jasmine replied. She opened the register, counted out 6 $1 bills, and shoved them into the glass tip jar. Buttercup hissed a warning from his milk crate, guarding the glass jar with wide, golden eyes. Theodore looked down at the Lykoi cat. A werewolf cat guarding a food truck. The irony hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He accepted his paper tray of sliders, his eyes locked on Jasmine. She was oblivious to his true nature, but she had already grounded him. Chapter 3. 2 nights later, the Friday dinner rush hit the Midnight Sizzle hard. Jasmine moved with rhythmic precision, plating orders while Buttercup guarded his stash of bottle caps under the counter. A loud, sputtering engine noise pierced the ambient chatter of the crowd. A bright teal motor scooter bumped up onto the curb, parking directly next to Jasmine's sleek, rose-gold compact hatchback. Aunt Rose killed the engine and hopped off the scooter. She wore a bright pink floral tracksuit that reflected the neon lights of the food truck. She marched straight to the service window, pushing past a group of teenagers. "Jasmine, my sweet girl," Aunt Rose announced, her voice booming over the sound of the sizzling grill. She reached through the window, trying to pet Buttercup. The Lykoi cat slapped her hand away with a swift paw. Rude little beast. Jasmine groaned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Aunt Rose, I have a line. What do you need?" "I bring fantastic news," Aunt Rose declared, clasping her hands together. She leaned over the counter, speaking loud enough for the entire street to hear. "I set you up on a blind date tomorrow night. His name is Arthur. He is a human accountant, very stable, wears sensible shoes. He will fix that broken heart of yours." A few feet away, leaning against the brick wall of the alley, Theodore froze. He held a half-eaten slider in one hand and a red plastic ketchup bottle in the other. The words, "blind date," triggered a violent reaction in his chest. His body temperature spiked, radiating a dangerous, searing heat. His inner beast snarled, pacing back and forth inside his mind with sudden, blinding jealousy. This witty, brave woman belonged with him, not some boring accountant in sensible shoes. My heart finally stopped bleeding from the last betrayal, and now Rose wants to hand a stranger the knife. Theodore squeezed his hands into fists. He forgot his raw strength. With a loud, explosive crack, the plastic ketchup bottle ruptured in his grip. Red sauce splattered across the brick wall and coated his thick knuckles. The sound silenced the immediate crowd. Jasmine peeked around Aunt Rose, spotting Theodore standing in the shadows, his chest heaving. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with a possessive fire. He dropped the ruined plastic bottle into a nearby trash can, wiped his hand on a napkin, and turned away without a word, stalking down the alley. "Who was that grumpy giant?" Aunt Rose asked, adjusting the collar of her tracksuit. "Just a customer," Jasmine murmured, staring at the spot where Theodore had stood. Her stomach flipped, a strange flutter replacing her usual calm logic. She shook her head, forcing her focus back to the grill. She needed to close up shop and balance her books. She had zero room in her life for an unpredictable man with anger issues. Chapter 4. The night air carried a biting chill. Jasmine sat at the small kitchen table inside her apartment above the truck garage. She opened her thick red spiral notebook, tallying the night's profits. Every dollar mattered. Her ex-boyfriend's betrayal still haunted her bank statements, forcing her to track her finances with ruthless precision. A heavy knock rattled her front door. Jasmine frowned. She grabbed the steel plumbing pipe she had brought upstairs and walked to the entrance. She checked the peephole. Theodore stood in the hallway, his jaw tight, his dark hair damp from the gathering storm outside. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, keeping the pipe hidden behind her leg. Theodore did not wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his broad frame dominating the small entryway. He paced into her living room, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor. He radiated heat, warming the cool air of the apartment. "Cancel the date," Theodore demanded, his voice a low, rough rumble. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his hands planted on his hips. Jasmine closed the door, leaning the pipe against the wall. She crossed her arms, her bright eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "The accountant," Theodore stated, stepping closer. He looked down at her, his alpha dominance flooding the room. "Cancel it. You are not going out with him." Jasmine felt her jaw clench. The sheer audacity of this man, storming into her home to issue orders, made her blood boil. She hated bossy men. She hated anyone trying to control her choices. "You do not get to dictate my life," Jasmine fired back, stepping forward to close the distance. She tilted her head back to meet his gaze, refusing to yield an inch. "You buy sliders from my truck. That does not give you ownership over my weekend schedule." Theodore clenched his jaw. a muscle ticking in his cheek. "I am telling you, he is wrong for you. You need to stay home." He thinks he can storm into my sanctuary and issue orders, but I bow to no man. Jasmine turned her back on him. She walked across the living room to the glass patio door. Outside, freezing rain began to fall, slicking the metal balcony with a dangerous layer of ice. She unlatched the lock and slid the heavy glass door open. The biting wind whipped into the apartment. She pointed a finger toward the dark, freezing balcony. "Step outside," Jasmine commanded, her tone matching the ice in the air. Theodore frowned, confusion breaking through his possessive anger. "What?" "You need to cool your hot head," Jasmine stated, pointing to the balcony again. "Outside. Now." Theodore stared at her firm, unyielding posture. He gritted his teeth, his pride stinging, but something about her fierce independence forced his feet to move. He marched past her, stepping out into the freezing rainstorm. The second his boots hit the wet metal grate, Jasmine grabbed the handle, slid the glass door shut, and snapped the latch lock into place. Chapter 5. The wind battered the brick exterior of the Copperfalls apartment building. Inside, the living room crackled with unspoken tension. Jasmine stood near the patio threshold, her posture rigid. She had carried the heavy steel plumbing pipe upstairs after her food truck shift, leaning the weapon against the entryway wall. She took her safety seriously. On the floral armchair, Buttercup, the Lykoi cat, snoozed in a tight ball. The feline rested atop a small pile of shiny silver bottle caps he had dragged up from the truck. Buttercup ignored the massive, furious man pacing the floorboards. Theodore marched out onto the metal grate of the balcony, his boots thudding against the iron. Freezing rain pelted the city, coating the streets and rooftops with a slick sheen of ice. The storm offered a biting, bitter cold. Theodore wore only his dark Henley shirt, a thin garment providing zero protection against the plummeting temperature. The weather did not bother him. Heat radiated from his skin in visible steam, melting the sleet the second it touched his broad shoulders. Jasmine seized the moment. She grabbed the handle of the sliding glass door. With a swift tug, she pulled the heavy panel shut. It hit the frame with a solid thud. She flipped the metal latch, locking him outside in the tempest. Theodore stopped his pacing. He turned around, rain plastering his messy dark hair to his forehead. He stared through the glass barrier, water running down his sharply angled jaw. She crossed her arms over her chest, tapping her boot against the floor. She pointed a finger toward the sky, signaling for him to stand in the downpour. She refused to tolerate a man barking orders in her own home. "I need a peaceful life, and this bossy giant brings nothing but chaos into my sanctuary." Theodore did not shiver. He stood like a stone statue in the deluge. His chest heaved, pulling in deep breaths of the icy air. He stepped closer to the glass, his golden-flecked eyes burning with a fierce, unnatural intensity. The alpha dominance he tried to push on her earlier meant nothing to her logic-driven mind. He placed his hands flat against the cold aluminum frame of the patio door. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. She expected him to knock, or perhaps yell a demand through the glass. She prepared herself for a stubborn standoff. Instead, Theodore shifted his grip. His fingers wrapped around the metal edges of the sliding frame. His biceps bulged, stretching the wet fabric of his shirt to its absolute limit. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the glass, a sound carrying more primal danger than human frustration. Metal shrieked. Jasmine took a step back, her mouth dropping open in genuine shock. With a brutal upward wrench, Theodore tore the entire sliding glass door off its tracks. The sheer physical force defied logic. Screws popped from the wall framing like gunshot blasts. The thick aluminum bent inward, groaning under his grip. He yanked the structure sideways, ripping a chunk of the exterior balcony railing loose in the process. The twisted metal clattered against the iron grate. He stepped over the ruined threshold, dragging the heavy glass door with him into the living room. He tossed the shattered frame onto her woven area rug. Glass spiderwebbed across the pane, but held together within the bent metal. The freezing storm whipped into the apartment, swirling around them, displacing the warm air. Rain blew across the floorboards. Theodore stood in the center of her living room, soaked to the bone. A puddle formed around his dark boots, staining the wood. He ran a hand through his wet hair, shaking off the excess water. A wicked, triumphant smirk spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. "I'm still hot," he stated, his voice a rich baritone over the howling wind. Buttercup woke up, hissed at the sudden freezing draft, and dove under the floral sofa for cover. Jasmine stared at the ruined doorway, then at the colossal man standing in her home. The cold bit into her skin, chilling her arms, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a panic attack. Chapter 6. Theodore watched Jasmine, waiting for the inevitable human reaction. He expected her to scream, grab her steel plumbing pipe, or call the police. Most ordinary people would crumble upon witnessing a man rip a sliding patio door out of a brick wall with bare hands. Jasmine did none of those things. She closed her mouth, uncrossed her arms, and walked past the shattered door lying on her rug. She approached her small kitchen table and picked up a thick, red spiral notebook. She grabbed a pen, flipped to a blank page, and began writing. Her bright eyes focused on the paper, her jaw set in a firm, unyielding line. Theodore frowned, water dripping from his Henley onto the floorboards. The freezing rain continued to blow through the gaping hole in the wall, dropping the room temperature fast. "What are you doing?" Theodore asked, stepping forward. Jasmine did not look up. She kept writing, tapping the pen against the paper. "I am calculating the damage. A custom sliding glass door. Labor for emergency installation, frame repair, and the exterior iron railing." She drew a hard line under her figures. "That is a brutal $3,200 repair bill. Due right now." Theodore stared at her. She possessed an iron will. She witnessed an impossible feat of raw strength and responded with a strict financial invoice. He felt a sudden, profound rush of respect for this woman. She locks me out in a storm, watches me rip a wall apart, and hands me a bill. The sheer audacity is magnificent. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his thick, scuffed leather wallet. The leather felt damp from the rain, but the contents remained dry. He withdrew a sleek, black bank card and placed it on the kitchen table next to her notebook. "Take the funds," Theodore said, his warm grin returning. "I apologize for the mess. My temper got the better of me." Jasmine picked up the card, examining the name embossed on the plastic. "Theodore." "No last name?" "Just Theodore," he replied, keeping his PAC affiliation hidden. He watched her pull a mobile card reader from a drawer, plug it into her phone, and process the exact amount. She handed the card back along with a handwritten receipt ripped from the red notebook. "We're square," Jasmine stated, slipping the notebook into her apron pocket. She shivered, rubbing her arms. The apartment felt like a walk-in freezer. Theodore noticed her discomfort. His inner wolf whined, hating the sight of his future mate shivering because of his reckless actions. "You cannot stay here tonight. The storm is getting worse." "I have extra blankets," Jasmine countered, gesturing toward the bedroom. "And a space heater." A space heater will not fix a missing wall, Theodore argued, his tone softening. He gestured toward the gaping hole leading to the balcony. You and the cat are checking into a hotel. I am paying for it. Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, pointing a finger at his chest. Buttercup emerged from under the sofa, letting out a loud, miserable yowl at the freezing wind. Jasmine looked at the shivering Lykoi cat, then back at Theodore. Fine, she agreed, her voice tight. But no 5-star luxury suites, just a clean room with a lock. Theodore nodded, stepping aside to let her gather her things. He stood guard in the freezing apartment, ensuring she packed safely, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Chapter 7. The morning sun did nothing to cut the chill in the air, but the storm had passed. Jasmine stood in her living room, a mug of black coffee warming her hands. She wore her hair in its usual messy bun, the bright yellow scrunchie holding the strands in place. A local repair crew occupied the balcony, drilling fresh screws into the brickwork. They maneuvered a new, thick pane of glass into the repaired tracks. Theodore's bank card had cleared instantly the night before, allowing Jasmine to book an emergency contractor first thing in the morning. A knock sounded at the front door. Jasmine walked over, pausing near her steel plumbing pipe, and checked the peephole. Theodore stood in the hallway, looking refreshed. He wore a clean, dry Henley and his dark boots. She unlocked the door. The contractor is almost finished. Theodore stepped inside, keeping his hands in his pockets. He inspected the new aluminum frame and the solid glass door sliding smoothly on its track. He nodded in approval, turning his attention back to her. I came to apologize properly, Theodore said, his voice sincere. Storming in here and demanding you change your plans was wrong. I crossed a line. Jasmine took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. She appreciated a man who could admit his faults. Her ex-boyfriend never apologized, preferring to shift blame whenever she demanded accountability. You did cross a line, Jasmine agreed, setting her mug on the kitchen table. And you owe me a new rug. The glass splinters ruin the woven fibers. Add it to the tab, Theodore said with an easy laugh. He took a step closer, leaving a respectful distance between them. Cancel the blind date. Let me take you out tonight instead. A real date. Anywhere you want to go. He listens, he pays his debts, and he shows up the next day. Maybe I can let my guard down for one evening. Jasmine considered the offer. She enjoyed his company at the food truck, even if his intense stares made her stomach flip. She needed a break from serving sliders and balancing her red spiral notebook. All right, Jasmine said, a slow smile spreading across her face. But I picked the location, and we are not leaving this apartment until that contractor seals the weather stripping on the new door. Theodore grinned, leaning against the wall. I can wait. 2 hours later, the repair crew finished the job. The apartment felt warm and secure once more. Buttercup resumed his post on the floral armchair, dragging a few shiny bottle caps out from under the sofa. Jasmine grabbed her coat and her keys to the rose gold hatchback. She drove them across the neutral district of Copperfalls, pulling into a massive, neon-lit parking lot. The loud crash of heavy balls hitting wooden pins echoed through the automatic sliding doors. Theodore looked up at the glowing sign. A bowling alley? I want to see how you handle losing, Jasmine declared, tossing him a playful wink. She marched inside, leaving the formidable Alpha to trail behind her, completely out of his element. Chapter 8. The indoor bowling alley bombarded the senses. Neon lights flashed across the waxed lanes, arcade machines blared synthetic music, and the smell of fried cheese filled the air. Theodore stood awkwardly near the shoe rental counter, holding a pair of ugly, multicolored bowling shoes. He felt ridiculous. As the alpha of the Iron Ridge Pack, he spent his evenings running border patrols and training hardened fighters. Now, he sat on a plastic bench, lacing up rented footwear. Jasmine stepped up to the lane, holding a bright purple bowling ball. She took 3 confident steps and released the sphere. It hooked down the oiled wood, smashing into the pins with a satisfying crack. 9 pins scattered. "Your turn," Jasmine cheered, stepping back to give him the floor. Theodore picked up a heavy black ball. It felt like a pebble in his massive hand. He approached the line, trying to calculate the exact amount of force needed. If he threw it naturally, the ball would shatter the backstop and explode into shrapnel. He held his breath, suppressed his werewolf strength, and gently lobbed the ball down the lane. It bounced twice, veered to the right, and dropped straight into the gutter. Jasmine burst into laughter, the sound bright and musical. Theodore felt his face heat up, but a warm smile broke through his embarrassment. He loved the sound of her laugh. "I need practice," Theodore admitted, returning to the seating area. Before Jasmine could throw her second frame, a familiar sputtering engine noise echoed from the glass entrance doors. Aunt Rose marched into the bowling alley. She wore a fresh, lime green floral tracksuit, carrying her teal scooter helmet under one arm. She spotted them immediately and marched straight down the carpeted aisle. "I knew it!" Aunt Rose announced, pointing a finger at Theodore. "You skipped out on Arthur the accountant for the grumpy giant from the food truck." Theodore stood up, offering a polite nod. "Good evening. I am Theodore." Aunt Rose crossed her arms, ignoring his greeting. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "What are your intentions with my niece? Do you have a steady job? A criminal record? I will not watch another man drain her bank accounts and leave her broke." Jasmine groaned, rubbing her temples. "Aunt Rose, please stop." I have stared down armies without blinking. Yet this elderly woman in a floral tracksuit has me fearing for my life. Theodore did not flinch. He recognized a fierce protector when he saw one. He squared his shoulders, giving Aunt Rose his full, respectful attention. "I run a private security firm," Theodore answered, blending the truth of his pack duties into human terms. "I own my property. I have 0 criminal record, and my only intention is to treat Jasmine with the respect she deserves. She is remarkable." Aunt Rose paused, her aggressive posture softening. She looked Theodore up and down, then nodded slowly. "Good answer. Better than Arthur." She spun around and marched back toward the exit without another word. Jasmine stared at her aunt's retreating back, then turned her gaze to Theodore. Her expressive eyes widened, filled with a soft, bright appreciation. She looked at him with profound wonder, completely captivated by his calm defense. Theodore met her intense stare. His quick wit vanished, his vast vocabulary evaporated. Under the weight of her beautiful, focused gaze, the fearsome alpha's brain simply flatlined, leaving him standing in ugly bowling shoes, entirely speechless. Chapter 9. The noise of the bowling alley surrounded them, a chaotic mix of falling wooden pins and synthetic arcade chimes. Theodore sat in the cramped vinyl booth, his broad shoulders pressed against the curved backrest. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the sticky laminate table. He had returned his rented, multicolored bowling shoes, slipping his feet back into his familiar dark boots with profound relief. Jasmine sat across from him. She took a sip from a tall plastic cup of soda, her bright, expressive eyes locked onto his face. The amusement from his terrible gutter balls still lingered in her soft smile. Under the weight of her steady gaze, Theodore felt his usual quick wit vanish. He, a lethal pack leader, sat speechless. She commanded his attention without speaking a single word. You handled Aunt Rose well, Jasmine said, breaking the silence. She set her cup down, tracing the condensation on the plastic. Most men run for the exit the second she starts demanding financial records. She protects her family, Theodore replied. He found his voice, keeping his tone even. I respect that. Someone hurt you in the past and she refuses to let it happen again. Jasmine dropped her gaze to the table. She adjusted the bright yellow scrunchie holding her messy bun in place, a nervous habit. The vibrant neon lights of the alley reflected off her canvas jacket. She took a slow breath, deciding to share the truth she usually kept buried under ledger books and extra work shifts. 3 years ago, I dated a man who claimed he loved me, Jasmine started, her voice steady but laced with old resentment. He ran a local business, or I thought he did. He actually ran a mountain of gambling debts. He convinced me to combine our accounts for a joint venture. She paused, her jaw tightening. He stole $25,000, an exorbitant sum for a small business owner. He bankrupted my business and vanished, leaving me with zero. Theodore felt a violent surge of anger flood his chest. His inner beast snarled, pacing against the confines of his mind. He wanted to hunt this man down. He clamped down on the urge, forcing his body temperature to remain normal. He reached across the table, offering a silent show of support. Jasmine looked at his calloused hand, then slowly reached out, letting her fingers brush against his knuckles. I built my fortress from the rubble of a broken bank account. But sitting across from this giant, the walls feel pointless. I bought the Midnight Sizzle food truck at a police auction a year later, Jasmine continued, a spark of pride returning to her eyes. I rebuilt my life from scratch. I track every single dollar in my red spiral notebook. I demand strict accountability because I refuse to be a victim again. You are no victim, Theodore stated, his voice a rich, unwavering baritone. He turned his hand over, gently clasping her fingers. You are a survivor, and anyone who mistakes your kindness for weakness is a fool. A warm flush spread across Jasmine's cheeks. She offered a genuine, beautiful smile, squeezing his hand before pulling away to grab her jacket. Come on, I need to prep the truck for tomorrow's shift. They walked out of the bowling alley together, stepping into the cool night air. The Copperfalls parking lot stretched out before them, bathed in the amber glow of street lamps. Theodore walked close to her side, providing a sturdy shield against the wind. They reached her sleek, rose-gold compact hatchback. Theodore waited until she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. Thank you for the date, Jasmine said through the open window, her eyes shining in the dim light. Even the gutter balls. I expect a rematch, Theodore countered with his warm grin. He stepped back, watching the hatchback pull out of the lot and disappear down the street. Theodore turned toward his dark charcoal utility truck parked a few rows away. As he walked, a subtle sound caught his attention. A camera shutter clicked. Across the asphalt, hidden in the shadows of a broken streetlight, a man lowered a digital camera. The scout from the Ashwood pack smiled a sharp, predatory smile, turning away to carry the fresh photographs of the Iron Ridge Alpha and his human companion straight to Alpha Kelvin. Chapter 10. Over the next few days, Jasmine and Theodore fell into an easy, natural rhythm. They started doing things as a pair, transforming his chaotic life into something manageable. On Tuesday afternoon, Theodore showed up at her apartment, carrying 3 heavy boxes of frozen beef patties up the stairs. Jasmine rewarded him with fresh coffee, and they sat at her small kitchen table, laughing as Buttercup the Lykoi cat hissed at the cardboard boxes. For the first time in years, Theodore felt genuine peace. Jasmine brought a calm, bright light to his stressful existence. She never asked him for favors, she never demanded his time, and she treated him like a normal man. Wednesday evening brought a stark reminder of his true reality. Theodore stood in the main office of the Iron Ridge pack house. Wood-paneled walls surrounded a heavy oak desk covered in patrol maps. He stared out the window, watching his enforcers run combat drills in the courtyard. He wore a clean, dark Henley, his hands shoved into his pockets. The heavy oak door swung open. Jessica, his fierce and loyal beta, marched into the room. She tossed a thick manila folder onto his desk, her face set in a grim, unforgiving mask. "We have a problem," Jessica announced, crossing her arms. She wore tactical black gear, prepared for a fight. Border patrols spotted movement near the eastern ridge. Ashwood wolves. They crossed into Copperfalls' neutral territory last night. Theodore turned away from the window, his relaxed demeanor vanishing. The warm, humorous man Jasmine knew faded, replaced by the lethal alpha of Iron Ridge. He walked to the desk, opening the folder to reveal blurry surveillance photos of rival wolves moving through the city streets. "Alpha Kelvin knows the rules," Theodore stated, his voice dropping into a dangerous rumble. "Copperfalls is neutral ground. If he hunts there, he invites a war." "He is not hunting us," Jessica corrected, tapping a specific photograph with her index finger. "My scouts intercepted chatter. Kelvin is searching for a specific vehicle, an old tactical van seized by human law enforcement several years ago. It sat in a police impound lot until it finally hit the auction system 2 years ago." Theodore frowned, studying the grainy image. "Why does Kelvin care about a human police auction?" "Because the previous owner was a rogue hunter," Jessica explained, her tone sharp and urgent. "Rumor says the hunter hollowed out the insulation panels and stashed a colossal cache of silver weapons inside the walls. Kelvin wants that silver to arm his pack against us." Theodore's blood ran cold. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Jasmine's words from the bowling alley echoed in his mind. "I bought the Midnight Sizzle food truck at a police auction a year later. My enemies will test the borders of my patience, but if they step into her world, they will face a monster they cannot survive." "Theodore?" Jessica asked, noticing the sudden rigid tension in his broad shoulders. "Do you know where the vehicle is?" "Gather David and Felix," Theodore commanded, slamming the folder shut. He bypassed his beta, striding toward the office door with long, hurried steps. "Tell the healers to prep the trauma ward. Kelvin is not just looking for a truck. He is looking for Jasmine." Jessica grabbed his arm, her grip iron tight. "You cannot storm into neutral territory with an enforcer squad. The human police will intervene. We need a tactical approach." "I do not care about human police," Theodore fired back, shaking off her hold. His jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. "Jasmine runs that food truck every single night. She stands inside a metal box, surrounded by hidden silver, completely oblivious. If Kelvin's men tear into that truck while she is working, she will die." He left the office, his boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. He needed to reach her before the Ashwood pack realized the gourmet slider truck parked in the Copperfalls alley held the very weapons they sought to steal. Chapter 11. Thursday evening brought a damp chill to the streets of Copperfalls. After her shift the night before, Jasmine had carried her heavy steel pipe back down from the apartment, wedging it safely under her truck sink. Now, inside the cramped interior of the Midnight Sizzle, she worked through her prep list. The flat-top grill hummed with latent heat, ready for the late-night rush. She wore her hair pulled up in a messy bun, secured with her signature bright yellow scrunchie. Her practical canvas apron protected her clothes from flying grease. She stood at the front counter, her red spiral notebook open flat. She tallied the cost of fresh produce, her pen scratching against the paper. The quiet routine grounded her. Down by her boots, Buttercup acted erratic. The Lykoi cat abandoned his usual milk crate perch. With his scruffy, wire-like gray fur standing on end, he paced the narrow floorboards. He carried a shiny metal bottle cap in his teeth, searching for a new hiding spot. Buttercup stopped near the deep fryer. He dropped the bottle cap and began scratching at a stainless steel wall panel. His claws screeched against the metal, a terrible, grating sound that made Jasmine wince. "Stop that, Buttercup!" Jasmine scolded, setting her pen down. The cat ignored her, hooking his claws into a small gap between the metal sheet and the floor framing. He pulled, trying to pry the panel open to shove his bottle cap inside. The metal groaned, shifting outward by half an inch. Jasmine crouched down, shooing the cat away. "You weird little gremlin. Go sit on your crate." She inspected the wall panel. 2 of the corner screws had vibrated loose over the years. She sighed, reaching into her small toolkit kept beside the heavy steel plumbing pipe under the sink. She pulled out a Phillips head screwdriver and fitted into the loose hardware. She twisted the screwdriver, forcing the screws back into the metal frame. She tightened them until the panel sat flush against the wall, completely sealing the gap. She had no idea that mere inches behind that thin metal sheet sat a small fortune in silver-laced daggers and hollow-point ammunition, hidden by the rogue hunter who owned the vehicle before the police auction. She simply viewed it as another chore to maintain her livelihood. Every loose bolt and worn gasket on this truck reminds me of my survival, held together by sheer willpower and elbow grease. Jasmine stood up, returning the screwdriver to the toolkit. She checked her watch. 10 minutes until she opened the service window. She stepped up to the glass sliding window and pushed it open, ready to welcome the night crowd. A blast of cold air hit her face. She frowned, leaning against the counter. The alley looked completely deserted. The usual ambient noise of Copperfalls, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of traffic, felt muted, smothered by a heavy, unnatural silence. The stray street dogs that usually hovered near the dumpsters, hoping for dropped meat, were gone. Not a single animal occupied the alleyway. The shadows between the brick buildings seemed darker, stretching toward the food truck like grasping fingers. Buttercup leaped onto his milk crate, ignoring his bottle caps. The Lykoi cat puffed up his sparse fur, flattening his large ears against his skull. He stared out the open service window into the dark alley, emitting a continuous, low, warning hiss. Jasmine felt a strange prickle of unease run down her spine. The logical part of her brain dismissed it as pre-shift jitters, but her survival instinct told a different story. She stepped backward, leaving the window open, and moved closer to the 3-compartment sink. Her gaze locked onto the dark alley, her hand resting near the hidden steel pipe, waiting for the first customer to emerge from the shadows. Chapter 12. Theodore grabbed the keys to his dark charcoal utility truck from the hook beside the pack house exit. Adrenaline pumped through his veins, fueling his fast movements. He shoved open the heavy wooden door, stepping out into the cool evening air. "Stop right there!" a sharp voice commanded. Theodore turned. Jessica stood in the driveway, blocking his path to the truck. Behind the beta stood David and Felix, the 2 towering enforcers. Both men wore serious expressions, their massive arms crossed over their chests. "I told you to give me space," Theodore growled, taking a step toward his beta. "I am going to Copperfalls. Alone." "You are the alpha," Jessica countered, refusing to back down. She met his fierce gaze with unyielding loyalty. "Kelvin is moving a strike team into the city. If you walk into neutral territory without an escort, you walk into a trap. I will not let you die over a human." "She is not just a human," Theodore fired back. "We march in there with an enforcer squad. We march in there with an enforcer squad. We escalate the violence. I need to get her out of that truck quietly." "Kelvin does not do quiet," David chimed in, his deep voice carrying across the driveway. "He will tear the street apart." "Then I will tear him apart," Theodore stated. He stepped around Jessica, unlocking the charcoal utility truck. "Stay here. Fortify the borders. If I do not call in 1 hour, bring everyone." Jessica clenched her jaw, but nodded, stepping aside. She respected his direct order. 1 hour, Theodore. Do not make me come retrieve your body." Theodore climbed into the cab, starting the engine. He sped down the mountain road, pushing the heavy truck to its limits. The dashboard lights cast a harsh glow over his tight features. He navigated the winding asphalt, his mind calculating every possible scenario. He needed to convince Jasmine to close the truck early, get in her rose gold hatchback, and drive away from the neutral district. He reached Copperfalls, weaving through the late-night traffic. He turned onto the side street leading to the Midnight Sizzle. He parked the utility truck a block away, avoiding the narrow confines of the alley to maintain a tactical advantage. He stepped out of the vehicle, his dark boots hitting the pavement. The cool wind whipped down the street, rustling the trash in the gutters. Theodore paused, his muscles locking tight. He flared his nostrils, pulling the night air deep into his lungs. The complex urban smells of exhaust, stale beer, and damp brick washed over him. But beneath the city grime, his sharp senses caught a specific, distinct odor drifting from the alleyway ahead. The scent of bitter ash. It was the foul, distinct signature of a rival wolf intent on violence. The smell clung to the air, strong and fresh. Scent tally, 1/3. A leader craves a solitary moment to breathe, yet my rank chains me to a relentless cycle of paranoia and blood. Theodore broke into a run. He abandoned human stealth, his long strides eating up the distance. He rounded the corner of the brick building, sprinting into the alley where Jasmine parked her food truck. The neon sign of the Midnight Sizzle flickered in the gloom. The service window stood wide open. He saw Jasmine inside, standing frozen near the sink, the Lykoi cat hissing on the counter. But Theodore did not look at her. His glowing, golden-flecked eyes locked onto the 3 powerful figures stepping out of the shadows, their elongated canines bared, blocking the path to the food truck. Alpha Kelvin had arrived. Chapter 13. The flat-top grill sizzled with residual grease, throwing a wave of radiant heat against the freezing Copperfalls wind. Jasmine stood behind the front counter of the Midnight Sizzle, a pristine white rag clutched in her hand. She wiped the stainless steel prep area, her bright yellow scrunchie holding her messy bun secure against the creeping dampness of the night. The usual ambient noise of the neutral district, the distant traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, had vanished. A heavy, unnatural silence smothered the alleyway. Buttercup, the scruffy Lykoi cat, refused to settle. He abandoned his milk crate and his shiny bottle caps, pacing the narrow floorboards near the deep fryer. The feline flattened his oversized ears against his skull and let out a continuous, low warning hiss directed at the open service window. 3 figures stepped out of the dense shadows, halting just outside the reach of the truck's neon sign. The man in the center stepped forward into the ambient glow. He wore a tailored charcoal wool coat, a garment far too luxurious for a dingy city alley. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were a pale, cold blue. The two men flanking him slouched in torn denim jackets, their shoulders hunched forward in a predatory, restless posture. Jasmine felt a distinct chill run down her spine, but she maintained her professional composure. She tossed the white rag into a bin and stepped up to the sliding glass window. "Good evening," Jasmine stated, her voice steady and polite. "What can I get for you?" The man with the cold blue eyes smiled. It was a sharp, humorless expression. He ignored the illuminated menu board bolted to the truck's exterior. Instead, he reached out, resting a gloved hand against the metal siding right next to the service window. His fingers tapped a slow, rhythmic beat against the aluminum. "Nice vehicle," the man observed, his gaze sweeping over the riveted seams. "Thick walls. You must have excellent insulation to keep out the bitter cold." As his smile widened, Jasmine caught a flash of white. His canine teeth appeared slightly elongated, sharp enough to catch the neon light. "I have survived financial ruin and built this sanctuary with my own sweat. I refuse to let a strange man intimidate me on my own turf." Jasmine grabbed her thick red spiral notebook from the counter. She pulled it to her chest like a shield, her expressive eyes narrowing. "Are you ordering food, sir? If not, I need you to step aside. You are blocking the window, and I cannot afford to lose a guaranteed $400 profit margin for the night because you want to discuss vehicle insulation." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the brick walls. He leaned closer, resting his forearms on the service ledge. The two men behind him shifted their weight, their muscles tensing under their jackets. Buttercup yowled, swiping a clawed paw at the air. Before the man could utter another threat, the heavy thud of boots struck the pavement. Theodore emerged from the darkness at the end of the alley. He closed the distance with terrifying speed, his long strides eating up the asphalt. He wore his familiar dark Henley, the fabric stretching tight across his broad chest as his muscles locked with absolute fury. He stepped directly between the service window and the three strangers, planting his dark boots firm on the ground. He turned his broad back to Jasmine, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle between her and the threat. "Step away from the window," Theodore commanded, his voice a lethal, vibrating rumble. The tension in the alley snapped tight, the air crackling with impending violence. Chapter 14. Theodore stared down the leader of the Ashwood pack. Alpha Kelvin held his ground, his cold blue eyes locking with Theodore's golden-flecked gaze. The two enforcers behind Kelvin bristled, their hands balling into fists. Theodore pushed his alpha command outward, a raw, invisible wave of dominance designed to crush defiance. The heavy pressure slammed into the rival wolves. The two enforcers flinched, their knees buckling slightly. They dropped their chins, forced to submit to the sheer power radiating from the Iron Ridge leader. Kelvin gritted his teeth, fighting the command with immense effort, refusing to lower his head. "This is neutral territory, Theodore," Kelvin hissed, keeping his voice low to prevent the human in the truck from overhearing their true nature. "We're just hungry citizens looking for a late-night meal." "You are trespassing," Theodore fired back, stepping 1 inch closer. "Take your men and walk away, now. If you take one more step toward her window, you will not leave this city alive." Kelvin calculated the odds. He wanted the hidden silver inside the food truck walls, but fighting a furious alpha in a cramped alley without his full strike team was a tactical error. He offered a mocking, sharp grin. "Enjoy the night," Kelvin sneered. He took a deliberate step backward, melting into the shadows. His two enforcers scrambled backward, eager to escape the suffocating weight of Theodore's aura. The three men disappeared down the street. Theodore stood rigid until the threat faded from his sharp senses. He turned around, walking to the side door of the food truck. He turned the metal handle, pulled the heavy door open, and stepped up into the cramped interior. He shut the door behind him, sealing them inside. The space was far too small for his towering frame. He ducked his head to avoid the overhead ventilation hood. Jasmine stood near the 3-compartment sink, still clutching her red spiral notebook to her chest. Her knuckles were white. If they return to threaten her business, I will tear their ranks apart and leave their bones in the gutter. Theodore let out a slow, controlled breath, forcing his body temperature to drop to a normal human level. He offered Jasmine a gentle, reassuring look, the lethal predator vanishing behind his warm, familiar features. "Are you all right?" Theodore asked, keeping his voice soft. Jasmine blinked, her tight posture relaxing fractionally. The moment Theodore stepped into the truck, the cold dread sitting in her stomach evaporated. His formidable presence filled the narrow aisle, acting as a sturdy, unshakable shield against the chaos outside. "I am fine," Jasmine replied, setting the notebook down on the counter. She picked up Buttercup, holding the trembling Lykoi cat against her canvas apron. "Who were those men? Do you know them?" "They are bad news," Theodore answered, stepping closer. He wanted to tell her the truth, to explain the ancient war raging in the shadows, but he feared the revelation would push her away. "They run a local gang. I recognize the leader. You need to close the service window and lock the truck. We are leaving." Jasmine looked at the open window, then back at Theodore. She saw plunging the interior into a quiet, insulated sanctuary. Chapter 15. The food truck felt small, intimate, and secure with the service window closed. The hum of the generator and the crackle of the flat-top grill provided a steady, comforting soundtrack. Jasmine placed Buttercup back onto his milk crate. The cat immediately curled into a tight ball over his shiny bottle caps, exhausted from his earlier vigilance. Jasmine turned around to face Theodore. The narrow aisle forced them to stand mere inches apart. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The heat radiating from his chest warmed the cool air between them. "You told me you ran a private security firm," Jasmine said, recalling his confident answer to Aunt Rose at the bowling alley. Her expressive eyes searched his face. "Are those men the reason you are always on edge?" Theodore hesitated, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath. "My work requires me to deal with dangerous people. I carry a heavy burden to keep my people safe. But I never wanted that danger to touch your life." "I handle my own problems," Jasmine countered, her independent spirit flaring. "I rebuilt my finances. I bought this truck. I fixed the broken panels and the loose screws. I do not need a bodyguard." "I know you don't," Theodore agreed. A warm, genuine smile broke across his face, reaching his eyes. "That is exactly what makes you so remarkable. You lock out the storm and hand out repair bills." His unwavering respect disarms every defense I ever built, leaving me vulnerable in the best possible way. The chemistry between them thickened, palpable and undeniable. Jasmine felt her heart drum a rapid, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at his calloused hands, then up to his lips. Theodore noticed the subtle shift in her gaze. The loud, chaotic world outside the metal walls ceased to exist. He reached out, his thick fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was incredibly gentle for a man of his size. Jasmine leaned into his palm, her breath hitching. Theodore lowered his head, his dark eyes falling shut as he closed the final distance between them. Before their lips could meet, a sheer, violent force slammed into the exterior of the food truck. The entire vehicle lurched sideways. The heavy suspension screamed in protest. Jasmine stumbled, losing her footing as the floorboards tilted. Theodore caught her by the waist, anchoring her against his chest. A second, brutal impact struck the side panel near the deep fryer. The metal groaned and buckled inward. Then, the locked glass service window exploded. A shower of sharp, glittering glass rained down over the front counter, scattering across the floor mats. Buttercup shrieked, diving beneath the 3-compartment sink for cover. A powerful, fur-covered arm, tipped with razor-sharp black claws, reached through the shattered window frame, swiping blindly at the air inside the cabin. Alpha Kelvin had returned with his full strike team. Chapter 16. Chaos erupted. The Ashwood pack swarmed the alley, abandoning their human disguises. Massive, snarling wolves hurled themselves against the food truck, their heavy bodies denting the aluminum siding. They targeted the exterior panel near the fryer, their thick claws tearing at the metal, desperate to rip the wall open and claim the hidden silver cash. Theodore shoved Jazmine behind him, pushing her toward the back of the truck near the sinks. "Stay down!" Theodore roared over the deafening sound of tearing metal. "Do not move!" He spun around, kicking the side door of the truck open with a violent thrust of his boot. He threw himself out into the freezing alley. Mid-air, Theodore surrendered to the ancient curse in his blood. He forced the shift. The transformation hit with brutal agony. His bones broke and snapped into new, elongated shapes. His dark Henley shredded into ribbons as his muscle mass doubled. Coarse, dark fur erupted from his skin. His jaw cracked, extending into a terrifying snout filled with lethal fangs. He hit the asphalt not as a man, but as the colossal, monstrous alpha of the Iron Ridge pack. 3 Ashwood wolves abandoned the truck, turning their glowing, murderous eyes onto the towering defender. Theodore let out a deafening, earth-shaking roar. He charged. He slammed into the first rogue wolf, his jaws snapping shut around the enemy's thick neck. He threw the beast across the alley, sending it crashing into a brick wall. The remaining 2 wolves flanked him, utilizing their numerical advantage. One lunged low, its jaws tearing into Theodore's flank. The other leaped high, raking sharp claws across his ribs. Pain is a temporary illusion. Her survival is the only absolute objective in this slaughter. Theodore snarled, ignoring the hot spray of his own blood hitting the pavement. His accelerated healing began working immediately, the deep lacerations knitting together at a visible pace. But the sheer volume of attacks overwhelmed the recovery process. He spun around, catching the second wolf with a brutal swipe of his massive paw, sending it skidding across the icy asphalt. Inside the food truck, Jasmine crouched low. Fear gripped her throat, tight and suffocating. She heard the monstrous roars and the sickening crunch of bone echoing from the alley. She peeked over the counter, looking through the shattered service window. She saw the massive, dark wolf fighting an impossible battle against 3 smaller beasts. She recognized the fierce, protective energy radiating from the giant creature. It was Theodore. Jasmine refused to freeze. She refused to let the man who fixed her balcony and bought her sliders die in the street. She reached under the 3-compartment sink, her fingers wrapping around the cold, familiar grip of her heavy steel plumbing pipe. She stood up, her bright eyes blazing with sheer defiance, ready to step out of the truck and join the bloodbath. Chapter 17. The shattered glass of the service window coated the rubber floor mats of the Midnight Sizzle. Sharp, glittering fragments reflected the flickering neon sign outside. Freezing wind whipped through the broken aluminum frame, carrying the metallic stench of fresh blood from the alleyway. Jasmine crouched near the three-compartment sink, her knees resting on the cold floorboards. Her bright yellow scrunchie held her messy bun secure against the relentless drafts tearing through her ruined sanctuary. She wore her practical canvas apron like a thin layer of armor against the chaos. Beneath the metal plumbing pipes, Buttercup huddled in the dark. The scruffy Lykoi cat squeezed his body into a tight, trembling ball. He abandoned his hoarded bottle caps. The feline let out a pathetic, shaking whine, terrified by the monstrous snarls echoing from the street. Jasmine reached out, running a soothing hand over his wire-like gray fur. She needed to keep him calm, but her own pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Outside the truck, the sounds of brutal combat shook the brick walls of Copperfalls. Heavy bodies slammed against the asphalt, claws scraped against the pavement. The food truck rocked on its suspension as a colossal weight struck the exterior panel near the deep fryer. The metal bulged inward with a loud, protesting groan, warped by the sheer force of the Ashwood wolves trying to breach the walls. They hunted for the hidden silver cache, but Jasmine possessed zero knowledge of the lethal weapons sealed just inches away from her cooking station. Jasmine tightened her grip on the cold, textured metal of her heavy steel plumbing pipe. Her knuckles turned stark white under the strain. She listened to the vicious roars outside. My life amounts to more than hiding behind broken glass, while the man who respects my boundaries bleeds in the gutter. She refused to play the victim. 3 years ago, a greedy man drained her bank accounts and left her defenseless. She rebuilt her finances from the ground up, demanding strict accountability for every dollar. She swore to never surrender her agency again. Theodore stepped into the freezing rain when she told him to cool off. He paid his repair bills. He protected her from the initial threat. She would not let him die alone in the dark. Jasmine stood up. Her bright, expressive eyes hardened into focused points of defiance. She stepped over her thick, red spiral notebook. The paper pages were now covered in sharp shards of broken glass. Her dark boots crunched over the debris as she walked down the narrow, cramped aisle of the mobile kitchen. She reached the back door of the food truck. She gripped the cold brass deadbolt and twisted the latch. She shoved the heavy metal door open with her shoulder. The frigid tempest hit her face, stinging her cheeks. Jasmine stepped down the metal stairs, planting her boots onto the icy asphalt of the alleyway. The scene before her defied all human logic. 3 towering wolves dominated the narrow space, moving with terrifying, lethal speed. In the center of the carnage, a colossal beast with thick, dark fur fought off 2 lighter-colored attackers. The dark wolf bled from deep, jagged lacerations along his flank and ribs. His accelerated healing factor struggled to knit the torn flesh together, overwhelmed by the constant barrage of fresh strikes. Despite the monstrous form, Jasmine knew the dark wolf was Theodore. His golden-flecked eyes burned with the same intense protective fire he showed her inside the cramped truck earlier. He snapped his heavy jaws, throwing one of the rival wolves against a brick wall, but the sheer numbers drained his stamina. A third Ashwood wolf broke away from the main clash. The beast circled the perimeter, keeping low to the ground. It snapped its jaws, thick saliva dripping onto the frozen pavement. The rogue wolf positioned itself in Theodore's blind spot, preparing to lunge at his exposed hind legs to cripple the Iron Ridge Alpha. Jasmine planted her boots firm on the slick ground. She lifted the heavy steel pipe, resting the solid weapon over her right shoulder. The raw terror in her chest vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. These monsters destroyed her service window. They dented her fry station. They sought to kill the only man who treated her with genuine respect. She took a deep breath of the freezing air, tightened her grip on the metal pipe, and charged out of the shadows to join the bloodbath. Chapter 18. The icy asphalt offered little traction, but Jasmine maintained her footing. She closed the distance between the back of the food truck and the circling rogue wolf. The beast remained fixated on Theodore, waiting for the perfect moment to strike the alpha's wounded flank. It ignored the fragile human approaching from behind. Theodore let out a deafening roar, rearing up on his hind legs to block a snapping bite from Alpha Kelvin. The dark wolf absorbed a heavy blow to the chest, stumbling backward. The rogue wolf in the blind spot saw the opening. The beast coiled its muscular legs, ready to launch itself at Theodore's unprotected spine. Jasmine swung the heavy steel plumbing pipe with every ounce of strength she possessed. The solid metal traveled in a swift, vicious arc. It cut through the freezing air with a sharp whistle. The pipe connected directly with the rogue wolf's lower jaw. The impact produced a sickening, loud crack of shattering bone. The kinetic force sent a violent vibration traveling up Jasmine's arms, stinging her palms, but she held her grip tight. The rogue wolf let out a high-pitched, gargling yelp. The beast collapsed sideways onto the icy pavement, its jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. It scrambled backward, pawing at its ruined face, completely eliminated from the fight. She walked into a monster's battleground with nothing but a plumbing tool, proving her courage outmatches any seasoned warrior. Theodore snapped his giant head around at the sound of the impact. His golden-flecked eyes widened in pure shock. He watched Jasmine stand over the fallen wolf, her chest heaving, the steel pipe raised and ready for a second strike. Her canvas apron fluttered in the bitter wind. She looked fragile compared to the towering beasts, yet she stood her ground with unyielding bravery. The sudden interference shifted the dynamic of the alleyway. Alpha Kelvin paused his assault. The rival leader turned his cold, pale blue eyes away from Theodore and locked his gaze onto Jasmine. Kelvin recognized the human from the service window. He realized this woman meant something to the Iron Ridge Alpha. In the brutal politics of pack warfare, exploiting a rival's weakness guaranteed victory. Kelvin let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated against the brick walls of the Copperfalls buildings. The Ashwood Alpha turned his broad, fur-covered body away from the bleeding Theodore. He lowered his head, pinning his ears back, and took a slow, deliberate step toward Jasmine. Panic seized Jasmine's lungs. Striking a distracted rogue from behind was one thing. Facing the focused wrath of an alpha wolf was a death sentence. Kelvin stood taller than a standard pickup truck. His thick claws dug deep gouges into the frozen asphalt with every step. Jasmine refused to run. She knew turning her back on a predator triggered their hunting instincts. She gripped the steel pipe with both hands, planting her dark boots wide to brace for the inevitable impact. She raised the weapon like a baseball bat, her knuckles stark white, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Stay away from my truck," Jasmine commanded. Her voice lacked its usual steady calm, trembling slightly against the freezing wind, but her bright eyes remained locked on the approaching monster. Kelvin bared his elongated canines in a grotesque, mocking smile. He coiled his powerful hind legs, his muscles bunching tight under his pale fur. He prepared to launch his heavy frame across the remaining distance and tear the defiant human to shreds. Theodore unleashed a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. The roar shook the loose trash in the gutters and rattled the broken glass inside the food truck. He ignored the burning pain in his lacerated ribs. He pushed his legs to their absolute limit, propelling his dark, colossal form across the icy asphalt to intercept the lethal strike meant for his mate. Chapter 19. Alpha. Kelvin launched himself through the freezing air. The pale wolf moved with the speed of a fired bullet, his lethal jaws aimed directly at Jasmine's throat. Jasmine swung the heavy steel pipe, but the weapon felt useless against the sheer size and momentum of the incoming beast. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the brutal, crushing impact. The impact never reached her. A dark blur crashed into Kelvin mid-flight. Theodore threw his colossal, bleeding form between the rival alpha and the human woman. The two giant wolves collided with a deafening, bone-rattling thud. The force of their collision sent a shockwave through the alley, knocking Jasmine backward. She hit the icy pavement hard, the steel pipe clattering out of her hands. Theodore and Kelvin hit the asphalt in a tangle of fur, teeth, and claws. They rolled across the frozen ground, tearing at each other with relentless brutality. Kelvin gained the upper hand. The pale wolf utilized Theodore's existing injuries, driving his sharp claws deep into the dark wolf's torn flank. Theodore snarled, thrashing his heavy body to break the hold. He shoved Kelvin away, but the Ashwood Alpha retaliated with a blindingly fast strike. Kelvin's claws raked across Theodore's chest, carving a deep, ragged slash over his ribcage. Hot, dark blood sprayed across the asphalt. Theodore let out a ragged gasp, his legs buckling under the sudden trauma. The Iron Ridge Alpha collapsed onto his side, his rapid healing factor sputtering and failing against the sheer volume of severe trauma. He panted hard, his golden-flecked eyes dimming as he fought to stay conscious. Jasmine scrambled to her knees. She ignored the scraping pain in her palms. She crawled toward the fallen dark wolf, the bitter wind whipping her hair around her face. She reached his side, pressing her hands against his thick, dark fur. The scent of warm cedar and black pepper wrapped around her, cutting through the metallic stench of the alley. It was the unique, comforting scent of the man who bought her sliders and paid for her broken balcony. Scent tally, 2/3 used. I will drain every drop of my own life onto this asphalt before I let that beast touch a single hair on her head. Theodore forced his head up, nudging Jasmine's canvas apron with his wet snout. He wanted her to run. He needed her to seek the safety of the locked food truck. His strength wavered, a cold numbness spreading outward from his torn chest. Kelvin shook off the dirt and stood tall. The pale wolf let out a triumphant howl, sensing the imminent defeat of his rival. The second remaining Ashwood rogue stepped up beside his leader, their pale blue eyes fixed on the bleeding alpha and the fragile human kneeling beside him. Jasmine grabbed her steel pipe from the ground. Hope felt like a distant, vanished dream. Hope felt like a distant, vanished dream. She prepared to swing one last time, determined to protect him until her dying breath. Before Kelvin could take another step, a deafening, terrifying howl echoed from the far end of the Copperfalls street. The heavy roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet of the neutral district. A heavy, armored, Iron Ridge transport SUV smashed through the wooden barricades at the mouth of the alleyway. The vehicle drifted sideways on the icy pavement, slamming to a halt just inches from the brick wall. The doors flew open. Beta Jessica, wearing dark tactical gear, leaped from the driver's seat. David and Felix, the towering Iron Ridge enforcers, charged out of the truck bed. Their eyes glowed with fierce, unrestrained rage. The 1-hour standby timer had expired, and the cavalry had finally arrived. Chapter 20. The arrival of the Iron Ridge enforcers shifted the battlefield in an instant. David and Felix did not bother with weapons. The two towering men charged down the icy alleyway, surrendering to the shift mid-stride. Their human clothes shredded into ribbons as they transformed into broad, muscular wolves with dark, bristling fur. They hit the frozen asphalt with bone-crushing force, intercepting the remaining Ashwood rogue before he could retreat. Jessica stayed in her human form. The fierce beta marched toward Alpha Kelvin, her boots crunching over the icy pavement. She pulled a thick, heavy iron chain from her tactical vest. The metal links clanked together, a grim promise of pack justice. Kelvin realized his tactical advantage had evaporated. His strike team was decimated. He stood alone against a furious beta and 2 lethal enforcer wolves. The pale wolf snarled, turning his muscular body toward the alley exit, attempting to flee the neutral district. Jessica threw the iron chain. The heavy metal wrapped around Kelvin's hind legs, pulling tight. The Ashwood Alpha crashed onto the pavement, his jaws snapping in frustration. David and Felix abandoned the unconscious rogue and flanked the fallen leader, pinning Kelvin to the freezing ground with their sheer body weight. Jasmine lowered her steel plumbing pipe. Her chest heaved, pulling in ragged breaths of the frigid air. The immediate threat vanished, leaving behind the chaotic ruins of her food truck and a bleeding Alpha at her feet. Theodore let out a low groan. The dark wolf forced his colossal body upward, his paws slipping on his own blood. He pushed through the blinding pain, determined to regain his human shape. His bones cracked and realigned, shrinking down until the dark fur receded. Theodore collapsed back onto the asphalt as a man, his dark Henley completely gone, left as ruined ribbons in the alley. He dragged his bare, exhausted frame backward, leaning his broad shoulders against the dented exterior panel of the Midnight Sizzle. He clutched his bleeding ribs, his head falling back against the cold aluminum siding. Jasmine dropped the steel pipe. The metal weapon clattered against the pavement, discarded and forgotten. She dropped to her knees beside him, her bright yellow scrunchie loose and slipping from her hair. He fought a war for my safety, and now I must patch his wounds the same way he patched my shattered trust. Theodore, Jasmine breathed, her hands hovering over his deep lacerations. She did not know how to treat werewolf injuries. The sheer volume of blood terrified her. She pressed her palms against his chest, applying firm pressure to the worst of the slashes. Theodore opened his eyes. The golden flecks shone bright against his pale, exhausted face. He looked down at her hands, then up to her expressive eyes. A weak, familiar grin touched the corners of his mouth. "You broke his jaw," Theodore whispered, his voice a raspy shadow of its usual rich baritone. "With a plumbing pipe." "I calculate my risks," Jasmine replied, a tear tracking down her cold cheek. She kept her hands pressed tight against his wounds. "And I refuse to let anyone damage my property or the people I care about." Jessica walked over, securing the iron chains around Kelvin's wrists. She signaled to an enforcer to sweep the dented food truck. They discreetly removed the hidden silver cash from the warped panels before the human police could arrive, clearing the way for the vehicle's repair. The beta looked down at Theodore and Jasmine, her fierce expression softening into profound respect for the human woman. "The healers are 10 minutes away," Jessica announced, tapping an earpiece in her tactical gear. She gestured toward the captive rival leader. "We will transport him to the holding cells. He will face execution for attacking an alpha's mate." Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat at the word mate, but she pushed the revelation aside. The cold night air whipped around them, carrying the distant wail of human sirens. She sat on the icy pavement, holding the wounded giant against the dented wall of her food truck, waiting for the pack doctors to arrive. Chapter 21. The freezing wind howled through the narrow Copperfalls alley, biting at Jasmine's exposed skin. She sat on the icy asphalt, her knees soaked in a mixture of freezing rain and hot blood. Her hands remained pressed firm against Theodore's bare chest, His dark Henley shirt was gone, shredded into non-existence during his earlier transformation. Under her scraped palms, his skin radiated a feverish heat, fighting to knit the deep, jagged lacerations carving across his ribcage. Jasmine's breath plumed in the frigid air. Her bright yellow scrunchie slipped further down her messy bun, strands of hair whipping across her face. She ignored the cold. She kept her focus locked on the golden-flecked eyes of the alpha, resting against the dented aluminum siding of her ruined food truck. I demanded accountability from every person in my life, yet this giant paid my debts in blood without asking for a single receipt. Tires screeched at the end of the alley. A dark SUV barreled past Jessica's charcoal utility truck, slamming to a halt near the shattered remnants of the wooden barricades. The vehicle doors flew open. 3 figures clad in practical gray scrubs sprinted toward them, carrying heavy wooden lockboxes. The Iron Ridge healers had arrived. "Step aside, human," the lead healer ordered, dropping to his knees beside Theodore. He popped the latches on his wooden box, revealing rows of glass vials and bundles of dried flora. Jasmine hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. She refused to move her hands from Theodore's bleeding chest. "She stays," Theodore rasped, his voice a gravelly shadow. He forced his broad chest to expand, wincing at the strain on his torn muscles. He looked at the healer, his alpha dominance simmering just beneath the surface of his exhaustion. "Treat the wounds. Let her watch." The healer offered a curt nod of obedience. He pulled a stone mortar and pestle from the kit, tossing a handful of broad, green leaves into the bowl. He ground the plant matter with practiced efficiency, reducing the foliage to a thick, dark paste. The other 2 healers worked in tandem. They used sterile water to wash the grit and ice from Theodore's lacerations. Jasmine watched the ancient werewolf folklore come to life. The healer scooped the crushed leaf paste with his fingers and packed it directly into the deep gouges along Theodore's flank and ribs. Theodore clenched his jaw, a low grunt vibrating in his throat. The plant medicine burned on contact, a necessary sting to kickstart the overwhelmed healing factor. The bleeding slowed to a mere trickle within seconds, the raw edges of the torn flesh sealing over the green paste. The healers wrapped his torso in thick cotton bandages, pulling the fabric tight to secure the poultice. Jessica stood guard near the unconscious, chained form of Alpha Kelvin. The beta watched the triage, her posture rigid. "We need to move him back to the pack house. The cold is draining his stamina." One of the healers stood up, offering a hand to help Theodore rise. "Alpha, we must get you to the trauma ward." Theodore swatted the healer's hand away. He pushed himself off the icy pavement, leaning his broad shoulder against the buckled metal panel of the food truck. He stood tall, despite the stark white bandages wrapped around his bare torso. "I am not going anywhere," Theodore stated, his golden-flecked eyes locked onto Jasmine. He scanned her from head to toe, searching for any hidden injuries. He noticed the scraped skin on her palms and the exhaustion pulling at her posture. "Check her. Now." "I am fine," Jasmine argued, wiping her scraped hands on her canvas apron. "Just a few scrapes. You took the brunt of the attack." "Check her," Theodore repeated, his tone leaving zero room for debate. The lead healer turned to Jasmine. He examined her scraped palms, applying a small dab of a clear, cooling salve over the broken skin. He checked her pupils and took her pulse. He stepped back, offering Theodore a confirming nod. "She is uninjured, Alpha. No concussions, no deep tissue damage." Theodore let out a long, shuddering breath. The rigid tension in his shoulders melted away. The fierce, terrifying monster that ripped rival wolves apart vanished, leaving behind the protective man who bought late-night sliders. "Good." Theodore murmured, his gaze softening as he looked at Jasmine. Now we can leave. Chapter 22. The aftermath of the ambush left the Copperfalls alley in ruins. Shattered glass from the service window coated the rubber floor mats inside the Midnight Sizzle. Jasmine stepped over the debris, her boots crunching in the quiet night. She reached the front counter, grabbing her thick, red spiral notebook. She shook the sharp, glittering fragments off the cover and tucked the ledger under her arm. She crouched near the 3-compartment sink. Come here, Buttercup. The scruffy Lykoi cat peeked out from the dark plumbing shadows. His wire-like gray fur stood on end. He let out a pathetic whine, ignoring his hoarded bottle caps. Jasmine scooped the feline into her arms, pressing his warm body against her canvas apron. Outside, Jessica draped a thick wool blanket over Theodore's bare, bandaged shoulders. The beta pointed toward the dark SUV. Get in, Theodore. I will drive. No, Jasmine interrupted, stepping out of the ruined food truck. She held Buttercup secure against her chest. He rides with me. Jessica frowned, her eyes darting between the human woman and the towering alpha. It is against protocol to separate the alpha from the enforcer detail after an attack. I do not care about protocol, Jasmine countered, her bright eyes flashing with sheer defiance. He protected my home. I am driving him to his. Theodore pulled the wool blanket tighter around his neck. A warm grin broke through his exhaustion. He looked at his beta, offering a subtle nod. Jessica sighed, stepping back to allow the human to take charge. Jasmine marched toward her sleek, rose-gold compact hatchback parked near the alley entrance. She unlocked the doors, placing Buttercup onto the dashboard. The Lykoi cat curled into a tight ball against the windshield defroster, eager for the artificial heat. Theodore squeezed his broad frame into the passenger seat. His knees hit the glove compartment, and his head brushed the ceiling. The small vehicle contrasted sharply with his lethal, towering presence. Jasmine slid behind the steering wheel, cranking the heater to its maximum setting. She put the car in gear, navigating away from the blood-stained pavement of the neutral district. The drive up the winding mountain road offered a stark transition. The neon lights of the city faded, replaced by towering pine trees and dense, inky darkness. The heater blasted warm air, lulling Buttercup into a deep sleep. Theodore sat in silence, staring out the passenger window. The adrenaline crash left him feeling hollow and exposed. He rubbed his bandaged ribs, his mind racing faster than the car. My pack house is a chaotic fortress of feral instincts, and I fear this brilliant, organized woman will run the second she steps inside. He worried about her reaction. Jasmine demanded order, neat ledgers, and strict boundaries. The Iron Ridge pack house operated on wild energy, pack politics, and raw emotion. He dreaded the thought of her seeing his true world and deciding the burden outweighed the benefit. Jasmine noticed the rigid line of his jaw. She kept one hand on the steering wheel, guiding the hatchback around a sharp bend. She reached out with her other hand, crossing the center console. She placed her hand over his thick knuckles. Her touch grounded him. Theodore turned his head, looking at her soft profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. Jasmine did not offer empty platitudes or forced conversation. She simply held his hand, offering a steady, quiet support. The dense forest broke, revealing a sprawling stone compound nestled against the mountainside. The Iron Ridge pack house loomed in the darkness, surrounded by high fences and patrolling wolves. Jasmine steered the rose-gold hatchback through the main gates, parking near the front entrance. David and Felix, shifted back to their human forms, rushed out to meet the vehicle. The enforcers reached for the passenger door. Jasmine squeezed Theodore's hand one last time, before letting go. "We are here. I have you." Theodore nodded, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar emotion. He pushed the door open, stepping out into his territory, bringing the brave human right into the heart of his world. Chapter 23. The interior of the Iron Ridge pack house hummed with restless energy. Enforcers paced the hallways, their voices a low murmur as they discussed the captured Ashwood leader. When Theodore walked through the heavy oak doors, a hush fell over the room. The pack parted like a yielding tide, giving their alpha a wide berth. Jasmine walked half a step behind him, carrying the sleeping Buttercup in her arms. She ignored the intense stares of the pack members. She focused entirely on the broad, bandaged back of the man wrapped in a wool blanket. Theodore bypassed the medical wing, leading her down a quiet corridor to his private quarters. He pushed the solid wood door open, gesturing for her to enter. The room offered a stark contrast to the chaotic food truck. Neutral tones dominated the space. A sturdy, king-sized bed sat against the far wall. A baseboard heating unit clicked on, pushing a steady wave of warm air into the room. Jasmine set Buttercup down on a plush armchair. The Lykoi cat curled up, instantly falling back to sleep. Theodore shut the door, the heavy latch clicking into place. The noise of the pack house vanished. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The danger had passed, leaving behind the raw, unpolished truth of their situation. Theodore walked to the edge of the mattress and sat down. He dropped the wool blanket, letting it pool around his waist. The stark white bandages wrapped around his torso painted a brutal picture of his sacrifice. He leaned his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his calloused hands. "I am sorry," Theodore whispered, his voice breaking the quiet. Jasmine stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. She untied her practical canvas apron, tossing it onto a nearby dresser. She pulled the slipping yellow scrunchie from her hair, letting the messy strands fall around her shoulders. "Sorry for what?" Jasmine asked, keeping her tone gentle. Theodore lifted his head. His golden-flecked eyes held a profound, naked vulnerability. The fearsome alpha dropped every single shield he owned. "I am a monster," Theodore confessed, his voice rough with unshed emotion. "You saw me tear a rival apart with my teeth. My life is blood, violence, and territorial wars. I brought that carnage to your doorstep. I shattered your peace." He swallowed hard, his hands curling into tight fists. "I am terrified my strength will hurt you. I am terrified my world will crush your independence." He possesses enough raw power to tear down brick walls, but he handles my fragile heart like spun glass. Jasmine understood the depth of his fear. She recognized the same terror she felt when her bank accounts hit zero. He feared losing control, just as she feared losing her agency. She closed the final distance between them. She stepped between his parted knees. She reached out. "Shatter my peace," Jasmine stated, her voice steady and absolute. "You protected it. My ex-boyfriend wore expensive suits and stole my future. You wear torn shirts and put your body between me and a literal beast." Theodore let out a shaky breath, his hands coming up to rest on her hips. He touched her with extreme caution, treating her like a priceless artifact. "I demand accountability," Jasmine continued, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. "I demand a partner who shows up. You showed up in the freezing rain. You paid your debts. You stood in front of that window and told a monster to walk away." She dropped her emotional walls. The fortress she built out of ledgers and long work shifts crumbled, replaced by a deep, undeniable trust. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. "You are not a monster to me," Jasmine murmured. "You are my safe place." Theodore pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, mindful of his bandaged ribs. He buried his face against her stomach, letting out a long, ragged exhale. The burden of his rank, the pain of his injuries, and the terror of rejection all washed away. Jasmine held the fearsome alpha, running her fingers through his dark hair, offering him the quiet, unwavering love he spent his entire life searching to find. Chapter 24. The baseboard heating unit clicked, push a steady, comforting warmth into the quiet confines of Theodore's private quarters. Jasmine stepped back a fraction of an inch from his embrace. She kept her hands resting gently against his bare waist, her fingers tracing the edge of the stark white medical bandages wrapping his ribs and flank. His golden-flecked eyes tracked her every subtle movement, holding a profound, naked reverence. The adrenaline from the brutal alleyway battle faded, replaced by a thick, palpable tension. As she stepped closer once more, the scent of spiced honey and fresh rain wafted from her skin, a sweet, intoxicating contrast to the metallic chaos they had just survived. 3/3. She commands my heart with a single glance, turning the fearsome leader of Iron Ridge into a man who simply craves her touch. Jasmine took control of the moment. She understood the severity of his injuries. The deep lacerations required time and stillness to knit together properly. She grabbed his broad wrists, guiding his hands away from her waist. She walked backward toward the king-sized mattress, pulling him along with slow, deliberate steps. "Lie down," Jasmine instructed, her voice a soft, unwavering whisper in the quiet room. "Let me take care of you." Theodore obeyed without hesitation. He lowered his towering frame onto the mattress, wincing as a sharp sting radiated from his torn ribs. He settled against the plush pillows, resting his thick arms at his sides. He watched her stand beside the bed. The dim light cast a warm glow over her soft curves and bright, expressive eyes. Jasmine reached for the hem of her shirt. She pulled the fabric over her head, letting it drop to the floorboards. She discarded the rest of her clothes with unhurried grace, revealing her bare skin to his hungry, focused gaze. She climbed onto the mattress, straddling his hips to ensure her weight never pressed against his bandaged torso. Theodore let out a ragged exhale. His calloused hands reached up, tracing the curve of her waist, exploring the soft texture of her skin with surprising reverence. He let her set the pace, surrendering his usual dominant nature to the woman who commanded his unwavering respect. Jasmine leaned down, trailing a series of gentle kisses along his sharply angled jaw. Her lips brushed against the rough stubble on his chin, igniting a visceral spark between them. She moved lower, pressing her mouth against the pulse point on his neck. Theodore groaned, a rich baritone sound vibrating in the quiet room. His fingers tangled in the loose strands of her dark hair, anchoring her closer. The chemistry between them ignited into a roaring fire. Jasmine guided the rhythm, moving with a passionate, intoxicating grace. She mapped the uninjured planes of his chest and shoulders, her touch acting as a soothing balm against the trauma of the night. Every caress communicated her deep devotion and her ultimate trust. Theodore worshipped her in return, his hands mapping her form, memorizing every curve and sigh. They moved together in the warm, secure room, far removed from the violent politics of the pack. Jasmine poured her affection into every kiss, proving her love language through profound physical connection. Theodore matched her intensity, his fierce possessiveness transforming into a tender, consuming adoration. Hours dissolved into a blur of tangled limbs, whispered confessions, and shared warmth. Exhaustion eventually claimed them both. Jasmine collapsed against his uninjured side, resting her head on his shoulder. Theodore wrapped one strong arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, standing guard even in his sleep. Morning broke, casting pale shafts of sunlight through the bedroom blinds. The bright rays illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. Theodore woke first. His accelerated healing had stabilized his lacerations overnight, the worst of the pain fading into a dull ache. He looked down at the beautiful, brave woman sleeping soundly against his chest. A fierce, primal instinct flared in his blood. He shifted closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He pressed his face into the soft skin where her shoulder met her collarbone. He inhaled deeply, rubbing his jaw against her pulse point to mix their scents perfectly, leaving a permanent, invisible claiming mark. Jasmine gasped, her eyes flying open, but she did not pull away. She arched into his hold, accepting the ancient bond, binding the human baker and the werewolf alpha together for life. Chapter 25. 3 weeks later, the midday sun bathed the Iron Ridge Packhouse courtyard in brilliant light. The sprawling stone compound bustled with relaxed, joyous energy. In the center of the manicured lawn sat the Midnight Sizzle. The food truck gleamed, its warped metal panels professionally hammered flat and reinforced, sporting a fresh coat of silver paint and a brand-new tempered glass service window. The repairs required a brutal $8,500 invoice. Theodore offered to empty his leather wallet to cover the cost, but Jasmine refused the pack funds. She handed over her own strict savings, demanding rigid accountability to maintain her fierce business independence. She owned her sanctuary, clear and free. Jasmine stood behind the new service window, her bright yellow scrunchie holding her messy bun in place. A pristine canvas apron protected her clothes. The flat-top grill sizzled with 3 dozen gourmet sliders. The Iron Ridge wolves lined up across the courtyard, eager for their daily meal. Down by her boots, Buttercup perched on a brand-new plastic milk crate. The Lykoi cat watched the wolves with unblinking golden eyes. He guarded a fresh pile of shiny bottle caps, occasionally hissing if a towering enforcer stepped too close to the tip jar. Theodore leaned against the exterior of the truck, wearing a crisp, dark Henley shirt. His ribs were fully healed, leaving behind thick, raised silver scars he wore with pride. He watched Jasmine work, a warm, lively grin spreading across his face. A loud, sputtering engine noise pierced the ambient chatter of the courtyard. A bright teal motor scooter bumped over the stone driveway, passing the towering iron gates. Aunt Rose killed the engine and hopped off the seat. She wore a blinding, neon-orange floral tracksuit that clashed violently with the rustic mountain scenery. She marched straight into the courtyard, adjusting her teal helmet under her arm. David and Felix stopped eating their sliders, staring at the boisterous human woman marching through their hidden werewolf stronghold. Aunt Rose ignored the giant enforcers. She walked directly up to Jessica, who stood near a small stone guard shack at the entrance of the main compound. "You must be the front desk security," Aunt Rose stated, pointing a manicured finger at the lethal beta. "I am here to inspect this so-called private security firm." "Where are the filing cabinets? Why are all your employees eating burgers in the yard?" Jessica blinked, her stoic demeanor cracking. The fierce werewolf warrior looked at Theodore, silently begging for an intervention. Theodore burst into a rich, rumbling laugh. He pushed off the food truck and walked over to Aunt Rose, offering a polite bow. "Welcome to headquarters, Rose. The filing cabinets are inside. Let me show you around." Jasmine watched the exchange through the open service window. She wiped her hands on a clean rag, a bright, easy smile gracing her lips. She looked at the sprawling stone compound, the loyal pack members, and the towering, humorous alpha guiding her loud aunt toward the front doors. I expected my life to remain an isolated fortress of ledgers and solitary shifts, but this chaotic pack transformed my lonely survival into a genuine home. She tossed a piece of cooked beef down to Buttercup. The scruffy cat snatched the meat from the air, purring a rough, gravelly sound before returning to his bottle caps. An hour later, Aunt Rose departed on her teal scooter, satisfied with her rigorous inspection. The courtyard emptied as the wolves returned to their patrol duties. Jasmine turned off the flat-top grill, wiping the stainless steel counters clean. Theodore stepped up to the service window, resting his forearms on the ledge. He reached through the opening, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Jasmine's ear. His golden-flecked eyes shone with unwavering adoration. "Ready to close up for the day?" Theodore asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Almost," Jasmine replied. She pulled her red spiral notebook from beneath the register, making one final tally for the afternoon rush. She closed the cover, setting her pen aside. She leaned across the counter, meeting him halfway. Theodore leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against her lips. He wrapped his hands around her waist, pulling her flush against the sliding window frame. The fearsome alpha and the brave human baker stood together in the quiet mountain sunlight, their turbulent pasts vanquished, perfectly content in the life they had forged. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Jasmine was brave for locking a drenched alpha out in the freezing rain while he claimed he was still hot, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this chaos unfold. Click the video right now. It is unhinged.